So we're just going to give it a minute or two and then we'll get started. All right, so why don't we just get started? My name is Davis Sensman. I am the owner and operator of Davis Law Office. And this presentation is brought to you as part of Hennepin County's Elevate Business series. Hennepin County puts this on. This is not the only thing they do. There are webinars as part of Elevate Business. There are also one-on-one technical assistance opportunities that we'll be happy to answer more questions about for you. And there are also peer-to-peer roundtables. So this is kind of the second in our series that we've done at Davis Law Office, thinking about issues that business owners are facing, particularly small business owners, as we reopen and possibly rehire after the COVID outbreak and everything we've dealt with in the past year. So again, my name is Davis Sensman. I work at Davis Law Office, and this is reopening and rehiring do's and don'ts. Oh, and of course, there we go. So I'm Davis Sensman. If you need to find me, if you have any questions after this, we will have some time for Q&A. But if you have any questions, if you would like to connect, we are providers through the Elevate Business platform for technical assistance. So if you need any follow-up, you can just visit our website, davismeansbusiness.com, and we would be happy to connect with you. Today's presentation, kind of the goal of it, is to give you high-level information and items to discuss with your staff, your current staff, folks you might hire, and your advisors, your tax advisors, your accounting advisors, your legal folks. We're going to cover a lot of stuff, and some of it, especially some of the information about the federal and tax programs, are going to be pretty detailed and pretty in-depth. Your job as a business owner is not always to know exactly how each bit of that works. Your job is to know the questions to ask of your advisors and your tax preparers, so that you can be sure that they're looking into the different things you need. So don't worry if some of this is like, I caught that there was a tax credit, but I didn't catch exactly how it worked. That's all the information you need to kind of talk with a tax advisor. So we've kind of broken this up into 3 sections. The first section is talking about what do I need to know, or what do I need to be thinking about to deal with my existing staff, to retain those folks who have been with me kind of through the past year, or before that, and to recall folks who maybe worked for me before, but especially if I owned a restaurant or a venue that played live music, a place that's been closed for quite some time. What do I need to be thinking about as I'm bringing people back, as I'm asking them to come back, as I'm kind of staffing back up with folks I already had a relationship with? And then we'll also have a section about what do I need to be thinking about to attract and retain new talent? What are the things that are coming up for business owners and for folks who are kind of job hunting? And then what do I need to be thinking about from the standpoint of what assistance is still available for me as a business owner, as an employer, and we'll go over that as well. So this section is what to do to bring folks back and keep the ones who've been with you through this past year. So what you want to do is, if you may have been all the way closed for a period of time, you may have been just kind of shrunk your staff a little, you may have shrunk hours. There's any sort of configuration. I've seen business owners who went from 50 to 5 kind of overnight as COVID kind of came in last year. So there's all different ways that folks are kind of reopening and figuring out, who's staying, who's going, how are we doing it, what does working here mean now? And so there are going to be a lot of questions. You're going to have a lot of questions, and the folks who work for you are going to have a lot of questions too. And the ones that we've seen the most, the ones that I've been working with business owners to answer and business owners have been telling me they're hearing from their folks are we going back to the office, to the location that we all used to work from prior to March of 2020? What are we doing about vaccines? What's our position? What's our policy? What can be our policy? What can be our position? And what about our customers? How are we going to be interacting with them? What's going to be different? What's going to be the same? These are kind of the big three that come up. The first one, are we going to be in our space? Sometimes you don't have a choice. If you run a restaurant, or you run a bar, or you run a live music venue, yeah, your folks are going to be going back into the space. And for some folks, for some companies, this is an easy no. A lot of companies, even very, very big ones, realized in the past year they can have their folks work at home. Because of that, they might not need such a large footprint of rented space or owned space. And so a lot of businesses have already said, no, we're not going back. You're going to be working from home. You're going to just keep doing what you're doing right now. And that brings up a lot of questions for a lot of people. A lot of folks are thinking, well, what about if we need to get together in person? And what are the policies going to be about that? And some folks that have not left spaces the entire time. If you had a restaurant that could remain open, doing curbside or something like that, you may have had folks who just kept coming to work every single day. If you have folks who are in IT who physically maintain a server, physically clean a space, those folks probably never stopped going. But we've got kind of all these different variations of where and how people will work. So I've told a lot of my clients that as you're making the decision, I think it's good to avoid absolutes right now, because how everyone feels absolutely right now may be very different from how everyone feels in a month or 3 months or 6 months or 2 years. So if you're thinking, we know we're staying home or we obviously have to go back, in a lot of cases that's going to be a definite. But especially if you're thinking, no, we're all going to keep working from home, we don't need a space, you might want to consider just kind of making a temporary decision, saying for now, or for the next 3 months, or for the foreseeable future, this is our plan. Knowing that and people who work for you who may have kids in school have to plan for that. People who they're going to need some time to plan. So as you're making those decisions, as you're setting your timelines, you're going to want to kind of involve your staff. A lot of folks are doing kind of anonymous questionnaires to their staff saying, how often ideally would you like to come in if they have a job that can kind of work from home? What parts of your job are easy to do at home? What parts aren't? What do you miss about coming in? What things would you want to definitely be in person for? And folks, different businesses are kind of forming their plans from there. But what I think the best ones have in common is they're not saying, absolutely, this is what we'll do for the future of this business. Because if we learned anything in the past year, it's, unexpected things come up. You may have certain jobs that can be done at home and certain jobs that can't be done at home. And as long as that's related to the actual physical needs, the not specifically physical, but the needs of the job, if the person doesn't have to be in your space to do it, and you've decided that's okay, it's all right if some of your jobs can be done from home and some of them can't. But you're just going to need to be able to articulate and probably write down why this job can be at home and why this one can't. And you don't want that to be tied to people. You want that to be tied to the job and the job requirements and the description of what their duties are. And so that can be different for different roles, but you don't want it to be different for different people, because that's when you get into an issue of, are we treating these people the same? The next question, what about vaccines? It's a pretty big question. Down here in the left corner, we've got just a really kind of the simplest way you can put it in 2 sentences. You can require vaccines. That is the federal government has put out a decision kind of towards the end of 2020 because there have been, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of question about whether business owners and employers can require that their staff be vaccinated. And so the federal government put out a decision and said, yes, you can require your staff to be vaccinated, provided that it kind of, it is for a reason. It is for a reason because you're protecting the other staff members, or you're protecting your customers, or so a lot of business owners are wondering, like, well, how will that work? And what about exceptions and things like that? So there are two really big federally recognized reasons that someone could request exemption from a vaccine requirement. One is for a sincerely held religious belief, and the second is for a medical reason. For whatever reason, they can't get a vaccine. They've been advised they can't get a vaccine. If you've decided you're going to mandate and require vaccinations to work at your place of business, you do not have to tell people, hey, you can ask for an exemption. It is on the requirement is on the employee to do the research and request the exemption. And then once the employee requests the exemption, you can ask, is it based on a sincerely held religious belief or a medical reason? And there's lots of really good kind of advice from the EEOC. The EEOC has been putting out a lot of kind of paperwork to really help business owners work through this. And if someone is saying, I need an exemption, I'm not going to be vaccinated, here's why, it's either for a sincerely held religious belief or a medical reason, then you can require that person to continue wearing a mask, or to continue socially distancing, or maybe say, you know what, we're going to need you to work from home because you can't socially distance in our really small space. So a lot of people worry, well, if I say we're all going to get vaccinated and I have one employee who doesn't, and they're wearing a mask, aren't I like making it clear that that employee is not vaccinated? You are not, because you're not saying anything. And the EEOC has said that is not a violation of anything. You absolutely are allowed to say, okay, if you can't get vaccinated, here are the precautions we're going to need you to take. The other item is you can ask about vaccinations of your employees. You can ask them to provide proof, kind of an attestation that says, yes, I am vaccinated. And you can just keep that in their file, just like any other bit of sensitive information, their social security number, their copy of their passport. And you can speak in generalities about your staff if you'd like to. A lot of business owners have said, well, can I say that, my whole staff's vaccinated? Or can I say that, a whopping majority of my staff is vaccinated? You absolutely can. You just can't say specifically, on the morning shift, we have 7 of 8 people. You don't want to get that specific, but you can definitely aggregate your data, and you can let people know that. You can let people who you might hire know that. You can let customers know that. So that's been a big issue for a lot of business owners. And we're kind of working through a lot of those things step by step. It's not going to be, even if you have 2 employees who request an exemption from a vaccine requirement for, even for the same reason, you might end up with different accommodations for each of them. You don't have to have exactly the same accommodations. You just, need to be engaging in your discussions with them and what you decide on in kind of an unbiased manner. And if you have questions about that, we can definitely address them at the end. So another question we're getting a lot from folks is, how do I reach out to my former staff who may have been, laid off, or, who we may have said you have to go on unemployment, whatever you called it. How do I reach out to them, and in what order should I do this, and how do I decide who I ask back first? Unless you have a collective bargaining agreement with your employees, or you're otherwise contracted with them, you've entered into any other kind of a contract, you don't have to. It's not an all or nothing. It's not, I had 50 employees, I went down to 5. The minute the governor's restrictions or the city's restrictions lift, I have to hire back all of those other 45. That's not how it works. You don't have to recall them all, but you want to be sure that there's no perceived bias in who you're choosing to rehire. So you might say, we're going to start with really, the folks that are vital, the folks that have the most institutional knowledge, the folks that do, the jobs that will free me, the owner, up to do a lot of other things. There doesn't have to be there's not one specific way to decide who you're recalling or how you're going to do it. But you just want to look at kind of how are we doing this and make sure there's no perceived bias. Make sure it doesn't look like, oh no, we've asked when we made this list, we've asked all the women to come back and none of the men or something else. That it may end up that way. You may have a business where you had, 7 women and 1 man, and that job is the most, the last one you'll need to hire back for. That doesn't mean you can't do it that way. You just want to examine what's the criteria you're using, how are you making the decisions, and you probably want to document that somewhere. You just want to kind of just a simple note somewhere that you're keeping in your records to say, here's how we decided who we were going to recall. And then the last issue that's coming up a ton, what about customers? Understandably, your employees, a lot of employees are wondering, especially places that have been closed, maybe haven't been open for indoor dining at all yet, or haven't had a big show if they're a venue, or retail spaces that have only been doing online. What's it going to be like when we interact with our customers? You want to explain, to your folks that how it's going to be, how you're going to ensure that your customers coming in are not going to be a threat to them, because you do have a duty as an employer to keep your staff safe the same way you do, under OSHA regulations. You have to make sure, a light switch isn't going to fall down on them, make sure that your plumbing is okay. You have that same obligation as an employer. So you want to let them know, hey, we're going to have a sign that says vaccinated people cannot wear a mask, and if you're not vaccinated, please wear a mask. Or we're going to have a sign that says, hey, for the foreseeable future, this is a really little space and we don't want to have to ask you about your vaccination status, so we want everyone to keep wearing masks. It's totally up to you in your space, but you want to let your employees know how that's going to be, and you want to let them know who's going to be enforcing those requirements. It's very difficult, and we have all heard kind of the horror stories about, clerks or staff anywhere who are front facing, who interact with customers, kind of bearing the lion's share of anger from customers about, having to wear a mask or something like that. So you probably want to say, a lot of the business owners I work with say, hey, for the first few weeks, for the first month, I'm going to be on site as much as I can. So I, the owner, can say, hey, here's how it has to go. You might have a manager that's going to be kind of a part of their job now, is enforcing those things. But you want to let your employees know, very clearly, here's what the rules are going to be, here's how we're going to enforce them, and here's who's going to enforce them. So that is, I keep being in the wrong space. So, whoops. So that is what we have wanted. Sorry, I'm just, okay. So that is kind of the things that have come up for staff members. That's questions we've been seeing. They've been very similar, different questions, but very similar big pictures of, what employees are thinking about as they come back to work. The second thing is there any remaining assistance for you as an employer? And I think that there's been a lot of confusion because some of these programs ended and then started again, and different bills kind of said different things about them. So we're going to go through kind of the top 3 things, and I'm just going to start with the one at the bottom because I don't have too much to say about it. But I've had a lot of questions from folks who got Restaurant Revitalization Fund dollars. That was kind of a separate program for restaurants, coffee shops, some entertainment venues, bars. A lot of folks have had questions like, can I use this money to pay my employees? Because I also had, maybe a second or a first PPP loan. And the answer is yes. You can use those RRF dollars to pay employees, but you can't use the same dollar. You can't use dollars from both to pay for the same amount of time. So if you're using your PPP funds, you're going to keep track of what hours, what time periods each employee was covered by the PPP funds. And then if you're also using RRF funds, you're just going to make sure that you don't have any overlap, and you're not using, for 1 hour of an employee's time, you're using dollars from 2 places. That's the only thing the government is really concerned about. The second thing, we're actually going to go up. We're going to go backwards up here. You may remember, you may have heard, you may have used the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act paid sick time. That was a thing where, the federal government was saying, hey, when we were in the height of COVID and we were in the height of kind of the big waves, they said, hey, you can get up to 80 hours, up to 10 days of dollar for dollar credit if you give your employees time off to quarantine if a doctor has told them they should, if they've been exposed, to go get a COVID test, to recover from COVID. And that program it was mandatory in 2020. The mandatoriness of it expired at the end of 2020, but the government said, if you have employees who didn't use it all up, you can still do it, but we're not mandating it now. And then in the American Rescue Plan Act, which was the most recent thing that passed through Congress and was signed by the president, there's a new set of FFCRA paid sick time. So from April 1st to September 30th, that it once again allows a dollar for dollar credit up to 10 days or 80 hours. And it basically reset the bank. So if you had someone who used up all their time or used up some of their time, this is a new slate of hours. And it's very easy, kind of the payroll period in which you are giving them the time off is the payroll period in which you can claim the credit. So it'll be money you just never send to the government. It's not like you have to be waiting for the money to come back. And now they have added, it still gives them time off to await tests or quarantine, gives them time off to recover. But it also it's also time off to get the vaccine. So if you, like many employers, are trying to, maybe you're not mandating vaccination yet, but maybe you're saying, hey, we're really encouraging people to do this. So we'll give you time off. We'll give you half a day off. We'll give you half a day the day after off. You can get a tax credit if you meet the criteria, which most small businesses will, where basically the federal government will pay for that time. You yourself don't have to pay for that time. So I think that's a really important, it kind of got overlooked in a lot of the everything going on, but it's really important for you to know if you're offering that to your employees, you can likely get the money straight back from in your payroll. And then the third thing is the employee retention tax credit, which got not a lot of attention. It was established in 2020. It didn't get much attention because it was you had to pick between it and a PPP. And most folks said, well, I will go for this PPP loan, this payroll protection program loan, because this PPP loan is gonna, it's gonna give me cash right now to pay these employees. But in one of perhaps the second, maybe the third COVID package that passed, Congress said, you know what, we're gonna let you use both. You can have an employee retention tax credit and you can have a PPP loan. So that is a big change that a lot of people didn't know. And another huge change that happened in the most recent package was that some businesses that started after February 15th last year, so a business that was just starting up, which we've seen a lot of them, they kind of fell through, they couldn't get a PPP because they didn't have prior year income, they didn't have payroll to compare. Those businesses, if they had to completely shut down because of government mandates, they now have much larger caps, and we're going to go through kind of the caps. But those businesses can get up to $50,000 a quarter, kind of dollar for dollar credits for payroll. So that's a really huge thing that has not gotten a lot of attention. So the way the employee retention tax credit works is if it's a refundable credit, and it basically is if you had 100 or fewer employees and you had a full or a partial kind of suspension or restriction on your business in at least one quarter of 2020, or if you had, let's say your business was able to operate, but you just, people weren't going out, there was no one there, you had 50% or more drop in your gross sales from 2020 to 2019, looking at any quarter, you qualify for this. But if your business was required to suspend or shrink what you were able to do, or you fully had to shut down, you also qualify. And basically what it is it's a refundable credit that you can also still look backwards. You can retroactively claim it. So if you haven't talked with your employer about the employee retention tax credit, and if those qualifications sound like, yeah, I fit those qualifications, you want to talk to them. You want to say, hey, do I need to, could we have been eligible for this in 2020? And if so, I want to apply for those credits right now. Because what it is basically a credit up to 50% of the qualified wages for each employee, with a maximum for 2020 of $10,000 per employee. So, if you had 5 employees and you qualified in 2020, you could get up to $10,000 in kind of payroll tax credits back per employee. So it's a pretty big number. And it once again is something that is kind of, you just apply and you take it now. So basically the portion of income tax that you pay on behalf of your employees, it comes out of there. So it might reduce that down to 0, depending on what quarters you're eligible for. But in 2020, it was a pretty good deal, 50% of qualified wages up to $10,000 per year per employee. Well, in 2021, they decided that that's good, but we could do better. And they raised it to if you had 500 or fewer employees. So bigger, bigger businesses could also qualify. And with some exceptions, you only had to have a 20% or more drop in your gross from 2019 to 2020. And they still had that full or partial suspension. So that's a qualifier as well. But for 2020, a lot more businesses qualified. And they also increased the cap in 2020. And so for the first 2 quarters, or for 2021, excuse me. So for the first 2 quarters of this year, kind of all the way up through about a week ago, June 30th, you could claim up to 75% of qualified wages, up to $10,000 a quarter. So you went from $10,000 for the whole year to $10,000 per quarter. And it was due to end basically at the end of June 2021. And then the ARPA, the newest law that Congress passed and the president signed, they extended it and said, we'll extend it to quarters 3 and 4 for 2021. We'll still do the 70% of qualified wages up to $7,000 per employee per quarter. So if you qualified for all of 2021, you could be looking at $10, $20, $7, $34,000, up to a cap of 70% and subject to some other exceptions. But that's a huge amount of tax credits that it's important folks don't just leave on the table. You may wonder, well, how long can I claim these? You can claim those. You can keep, you can claim it for quarter 1, you can claim it for quarter 2, until in 2021, your business is back to 80% of your gross revenue that you had in 2019. Or if you just have not bounced back, if you don't think you're going to make it, or you don't make it up to that in 2021, you can claim it through this year. So this is a pretty big deal that didn't get a lot of attention when it first came out, mostly because it was overshadowed by the PPP program and because you couldn't combine them. But now that you can combine them, it's really important that business owners who have employees talk to their tax advisors and say, let's make sure we're not leaving money on the table through this program. Because what the government think, they pass these things and then they think, well, that's a whole lot of help. But if you don't know about it, then it's certainly not helpful to you. So it's just, our goal here, the goal of Hennepin County, is to make sure you are aware of these things so that you can ask someone about it, you can get the right technical help. And if you have a tax advisor, if you don't have a tax advisor, or you have someone who kind of really doesn't understand how these things are working, reach out through the Elevate Business platform and say that you need help with that. And we will connect you to the right person. So we've talked about our existing staff. We've talked about these programs that still exist to help us. How do we attract new staff? This is one of the biggest things. It doesn't matter the industry, it doesn't matter the size of the business. Everyone is hiring and everyone is having a hard time finding folks to hire. And a lot of people, a lot of shorthand answers are like, well, raise the rates you pay them more. And that, that might be part of the issue. That might be something you need to think about, but that's not the only option. And there are some lesser known benefits that you might be able to offer as a small business owner that might not even cost you anything. And there are also other ways to kind of attract talent. A big one before we get into this about how to attract new hires in a tight market is you should use your best employees as your network to find other people. If you have folks who do a really great job for you, chances are they know other people who might do a really great job for you. So a lot of business owners, they say we're going to hire, they put up the ads wherever they normally put them, and then they wait, and they don't really empower their staff or tell their staff, hey, if you know really good people, you should ask them to apply. And I've worked with a bunch of business owners who have found it really helpful to offer like $100 incentive or $500 incentive. Hey, if we hire someone that you refer in, and they stay for X period of time, you're going to have a cash bonus, or you might have an extra paid day off, or whatever is appealing to your employees. It's not a bad idea, and it works really well. Bigger companies do a lot of it. Recruiting firms do a lot of it, but you can do it even with your small team. And it's very nice sometimes if you work in a small space on a small team, thinking like you can have some help, you can have some say in who else works in that space. So don't forget that your existing talent, your existing employees are probably your best place to find others just like that. So one note that we just need to know is that the Minneapolis minimum wage for small employers went up to $12.50 an hour on July 1st, 2021. So there's lots of information about that on the city's website. There's probably links to it from the Elevate Business platform, but just know that that is something that happened. So if you were paying minimum wage, adjust your job postings and adjust your payroll because minimum wage did increase. Another thing, speaking about the Minneapolis minimum wage and how different cities and different municipalities may have different rules around, earn sick and safe time or things like that. I found when I was working to educate business owners about a lot of those things that sometimes people think if you are required by law to do something, if you are required by law to offer X days of earned sick and safe time, if you are required, or are getting paid by the government to offer the paid leave that we just talked about a little bit ago under ARPA, that you couldn't advertise those as like benefits or things you offer in your postings. And you 100% can. If you are in, a lot of people who are applying for jobs don't know that if I take that job in this city that requires earned sick and safe time versus that city right there, I will automatically be qualifying for this extra time off. And so those are things you want to look into to make sure you're doing the right thing as a employer, make sure that you're abiding by the law, but also you can absolutely advertise those. Hey, if you work here, we offer the following. Look through, ask your payroll provider or the person that runs your payroll, hey, what all do we offer? What are we required to offer by the federal government, by the state, by the city? And then you can list those things in your job offering. I hear so many people say, especially small business owners say, well, I don't offer benefits, because they think of benefits as like health insurance. And, if you don't offer health insurance, then you don't think you offer benefits. You definitely offer some benefits. You just have to think about what they are and then quantify them. Another thing is if you offer like employee discounts or things like that, those add up. So you want to list them all in your job posting so that folks can really be comparing apples to apples. Post a salary range. I know it's hard sometimes because you might get someone who has 10 years of experience, you might get someone who has 1, and both of those people may be able to do the job. And so you don't want to, you don't want people not to apply because they think, you're listing what you'd pay a new person. And if it's negotiable, let them know that. A lot of folks will skip applying if it's not disclosed, or if they think, well, I'm a little outside the top of the range. And whenever I help business owners kind of negotiate their agreements with people once they want to hire them, sometimes we do bump a little up above the top of the range, or sometimes someone will come in and say, hey, I don't need XYZ paid benefit. Can I get more, can I negotiate a higher salary? Sometimes that happens. So I wouldn't, if it's definitely set in stone and you're only going to be paying this hourly rate, or you're only going to be paying up to this amount, make that clear. But if you have a range, or it's negotiable, or, depending on experience, it might be, put that in the posting, because a lot of folks look at a posting and don't think, hey, I wonder if I could negotiate some of that. And finally, think about job perks that don't have an actual cost. When I was first hiring employees at my law firm, I was also like getting insurance for myself. And thankfully, I was speaking with an insurance agent. It was just life insurance. I was speaking with an insurance agent who said, oh, you own a business. Do you have any employees? You could probably get group life insurance that would either be the same or possibly less than what you'd be paying for this individual policy. And I thought that was, how could that be? But it was a totally different type of policy. So it was a much bigger pool. So it actually did end up being slightly cheaper for me to insure all of us at kind of a low base rate on our lives with a very simple term policy than it would have been to get the same simple term policy for me individually. So it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense, but anything that you kind of get to protect yourself personally is something that might be able to be gotten in a bigger group for your employees, and will also be something that you most likely can deduct tax-wise, that will reduce your taxable income for the business. So other things that I've seen folks offer, bus passes, that's a big thing. Nice ride memberships, I've seen businesses do that. Right now, a lot of businesses are thinking about replacements for former office perks. Like if they used to provide sodas or sparkling waters or, coffee, they're looking into, well, hey, can I send my folks, something once a month? Or can I give them, some of them are giving, a little gift cards to go get yourself some snacks. And another thing that I recently have learned about that I thought was interesting is an app called Turn Signal, and it's an app that they're kind of offering it and advertising it as something that business owners can offer, especially for their employees who drive. And it's basically for if you get pulled over, it connects you immediately to an attorney who kind of can walk you through what to do, what not to do, what not to say. I think also if you're in an accident, making sure you don't say, I'm sorry. But that's a thing that I would have never thought of that as like a perk that you could offer your employees. But if you have a job, if your job requires driving around place to place, I could totally see a potential hire saying, oh, well, this business will do that for me and this one doesn't. So you are able to advertise, mileage reimbursements, things like that. Go ahead and advertise it, because that's really going to set your ad apart from other folks who are competing for the same talent. And then finally, we're going to talk about the documents that you want to have in place and the documents you might want to update since we've had some changes to how things work. And the documents that you should definitely have that, might not be something that's required, by an I-9 or something like that, but are really good to have in place to protect you and to protect your employees if anything happens. So, we're going to talk about, what does Atwill mean? How can it be altered? And what absolutely do I need to have in writing? So Atwill Employment is the basic lay of the land in Minnesota, which means you can be fired or you can quit for any reason or no reason, just not an illegal reason. So, I always give folks the example of, I can walk in and I can have an employee wearing an orange shirt and I can say, I hate orange shirts, you're fired. And that's not an illegal reason, because people who wear orange shirts aren't a member of a protected class. But I cannot walk in and say, oh, you're pregnant, I hate it, you're fired. That's a protected class in the state of Minnesota. So, a lot of folks think they have to have a cause for firing someone. A lot of folks think there's a lot of misconceptions around it, but really at-will means the employee can leave whenever they want, and you can really kind of fire them without with or without cause, just not for an illegal reason. If you enter into a contract or you have a collective bargaining agreement because your employees are unionized, or something has altered the at-will employment arrangement, then you might not be able to. Then you might need cause. But that only happens if you somehow affirmatively alter it. At-will is the default in the state of Minnesota. So, how can you alter it? Or, does that mean you shouldn't have a contract with an employee? Absolutely not. We're going to talk a little bit more about kind of what that means. You'll just want to put language in any contract that you have with them or any offer that you send that says this is still an at-will job, and the fact that we have this contract that lays out what we're going to do or what you might get if you leave, or what terms we're going to agree to, that doesn't change it. It's still at will, but we're just sending out what we're going to do. So the biggest thing I've seen come up with kind of documents we need to change are changes in roles. So, we talked about, are you going to have, a manager who needs to make sure the customers are abiding by the rules? Are you going to have a manager who's maybe doing temperature checks for employees as they come in or customers as they come in? Does your HR person now need to also do vaccine documentation? There are just additional things that we're doing now that that weren't part of our world in March of 2020 that you may want to add to your job descriptions, or to, if you have an agreement with your existing staff, to those documents. Just sit and think about going through a day. I mean, that's how you kind of come up with job descriptions, is let's look at all the things you do and then put it all in here. Think about what additional things there might be, and then think about where you have that written. Is it written in an employee agreement? Is it written in a handbook? Is it written in your job postings? And update them wherever you need to. Changes to wages. As we talked about, as of July 1st, if you paid minimum wage in Minneapolis, you need to raise that wage up. It's $12.50 now. Or if you've changed an employee's rate, or you've changed the base rate of what you're paying for a particular job, it can be really easy to forget to change existing folks, or to forget to change it in your handbooks or in your offers of employment or things like that. And sometimes that'll really freak someone out if you've advertised, hey, we pay this much an hour, and you've talked to them and you say, yeah, we're going to pay that much an hour, and then they get a document and it says a different amount. That can be really concerning, and it might just be because you have some documents that you didn't think to update. So as you're kind of doing your first new hires back, take a look at each document, or ask whoever does that for you to take a look at each document and have them all updated, so that there's just no confusion. And then accommodations. We talked at the beginning about, if you have a vaccine requirement and you're providing an accommodation to an employee, you want to document every step of that. You want the employee's request in writing. You want you both agreeing to what the accommodation is that you're making, the reasonable accommodation. You want to document all of that just so you have it, so that you can't have any concern about it, either on the part of the employee or on the part of another employee, who has a concern. You're just going to want to document it all and keep it in their file. And then there is a possibility that sometimes you won't be able to make an accommodation. It happens that, you're going to want to start from a place of making an accommodation. But if you have consulted with a legal advisor and you have followed up with maybe the state of Minnesota to run through, how would we do this? How could we, there's no way we can let someone work from home. There's no way we can have someone 6 feet apart. It's for whatever reason, it just is not reasonable, or it would cost you a lot of money, or it would, there are cases where a business might not be able to provide an accommodation, or the accommodation might not be reasonable. Then you have to document things. If you're working on an accommodation, you want to have it written down. But if you and the employee kind of can't come to a reasonable agreement of what the accommodation will be, you're going to really, really want to have that information all documented kind of as you went along. And you're going to want to consult with, you know, an HR professional, legal, possibly the state, or any kind of the EEOC, any advising authority, just to make sure, you know, we've got our I's dotted and our T's crossed. And there, if you call and ask questions, they're going to want to know, hey, can you send us whatever has been transpiring to date? So you're going to want those documents. And then your handbooks or your expectations. Not every business has a handbook. You might have a handbook though. And normally what happens is you spend a whole lot of time drafting that handbook and then nothing ever gets updated. At my first job at a law firm, I got a handbook that said, you can only smoke in your office. And you absolutely could not smoke in our offices. Like, this was, you know, 20 years ago in a building downtown. But when they wrote the handbook, you could only smoke in your office. And that was like a restriction. So you want to look at your handbook every once in a while. You want to make sure that you're updating it. You know, if things have changed, just like we've talked about all the way through here. And if you don't have a handbook, if you just kind of have expectations, or you communicate expectations maybe by email, or now is a really, really good time to kind of gather those all together and remind people what those are. You're going to have people coming back to longer shifts. You might have new people coming in. You might have people coming back who haven't been there a long time. It's a really good idea to gather all those expectations, new, old, existing rules of the road, and get those all in writing. And it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be a huge, you know, handbook. It doesn't have to be bound and look beautiful, but it's good to spell out, here's what we're going to expect. And here's what you can expect, you know, so it kind of goes both ways. And then finally, if there are any issues, because there are going to be issues, you're going to have, you know, as you're figuring out, are we coming back? Are we not? Who's going to work where? What requirements are we going to have? What their issues are going to arise. And the best thing you can do is document them when they're very, very small, so that if they get bigger, you have all of that. No one's relying on like, no, I think what I said was. It's much easier to just have it written down, and to have the other side, whoever you're kind of working through the issue with, also sign it and say, yeah, I remember it that way too. You know, it's not the end of the world if you don't. So it's not, none of this is really the end of the world. If you're like, uh-oh, we did one of these things and we didn't get it in writing yet, just get it in writing as soon as you can, you know, update it as soon as you can. But basically, especially in this kind of post-COVID, like where workplaces are a lot different and things are a lot different, it's just going to be a good idea to kind of keep some really good notes as we're going here in the beginning. So that is the end of my prepared remarks. That is, like I said in the beginning, if you have any questions, that's my email address right there. We're going to make sure that folks can have access to these slides. We've recorded this, so if you kind of want to go back and review anything, you absolutely can. And again, you know, the Elevate Business platform, elevatebusinesshc.com, has so much information. And there will be lots more kind of presentations like this, peer-to-peer roundtables, things like that. So I really encourage you to kind of go and check out everything there is there, all at no cost to Hennepin County businesses. So now if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Any questions?
Yes, I'm not sure if Christine is back on or not. I know she had to step away, but I don't see any questions in the Q&A. So
I don't either.
Yeah, if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll see those there.
Wow. Well, I hope that means that we just covered every single thing you could wonder about. I really do mean it though. If you're watching this on video, if you weren't here with us live today, you can absolutely email me with any questions you have, because we speak in generalities when we talk about these things, but it's really each case is specific. Each individual employee or individual employer is specific. So if you need an answer to something, if you just want to gut check something, we are happy to help. The rest of the providers at Elevate Business are happy to help. And yeah, that's about it. All right, last call for questions. Oh. All right. All right, so you should be able to get these documents anywhere on the Elevate Business, and they may be sent to you as well. I'm not 100% sure, but if you need them, you just get in touch with us and we'll get them to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.